As a Greek, I have to thank, first of all, my Turkish friend. And Mark, thank you for the invitation again, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, dear students. Sorry for this delay, it was a technical problem. As a person who really believes to the European Union and knows well the problems that it has, today I would like to focus and to speak particularly on one very hot issue which will stay with us for many years, and this is the refugee issue. The process of European integration, you know that at European level we're 28 member states. There was a big problem now with Brexit, but still there are 27 member states. And of course, there is always a program for further integration in order to be more strong and more effective. The process of this integration has been stalled. The crisis of integration subverts European normalcy. There are many problems in the member states, particularly because it is a crisis of legitimization and legitimacy. Who decides and how much can be decided at European level and at the national level. The way the European Union has handled the refugee migration crisis is one demonstration that it holds little power over the neighbors, either to the east, or to the south. And you know that European Union has neighbors around it which are all in big troubles. There is the problem with Russia and Ukraine, then it is Middle East, then it is Africa. Everywhere in all our neighbors, there are big problems. There was a crisis management. This crisis management has highlighted how the European Union is failing to balance members' loss of controls over national sovereignty with broad burden sharing. And in my own country, Greece, the situation was so difficult because it is in the gate of the refugee problem that, again, as the case was in the economic crisis, it has been a laboratory. Some facts. What is the current situation now? In Europe, the years 2015 and 2016 will arguably be remembered as the years of the refugee crisis. More than 1,200,000 people, including over 100,000 children, entered the European Union in search of safety, in search of a better life, with over 136,000 more arriving since the beginning of 2016. The effective integration of recently arrived, and you all know how big the problem is in Germany as well, all these arrived and long-standing immigrants have to be included in the societies. Successful integration matters, not least because it is an economic necessity and a precondition for democratic stability and social cohesion. Since the end of September 2016, the total number of arrivals from Turkey to the Greek islands was 5.7 thousand. They represent an average daily arrival of around 81 persons. Although daily arrivals are still higher than before the summer, numbers remain much lower comparing what was the situation last year, because the days of the agreement between the European Union and the Turkey, the famous EU-Turkey statement, the average arrivals were more than 1,700 people every day in the Greek islands. In this period, there were 63 fatalities and missing persons per day. While each loss of life is highly regrettable. The situation today, which is extremely low now, is a signal that things go much better than they were in 2015. In September 2015, Angela Merkel, the German Chancellor, welcomed all Syrians to Germany. So she opened the door to as many as 1 million people who came to Germany, even though doing so, it meant suspending European Union rules. Europe's power dynamics changed instantly. Many countries refused to accept even modest number of refugees. Quotas from European officials have not been accepted by many countries. The far right rose in polls, and in some countries they have more than 30%. National conservative leaders became increasingly bold in all member countries. Immigration issue became number one in the public discussion. Across Europe, anti-Muslim, anti-immigrant sentiment was rising. But Europe was overwhelmed and fearful, largely unprepared and divided. And more or less, this is the situation today. My view on these issues, because I tried to present the situation in a few numbers, depending on the extent to which the European Union can overcome this division and improve its policies, the refugee crisis could be the catalyst for the future of Europe. And when we talk about the future of Europe, there are three scenarios. One is more Europe, so to have a more strengthened European Union with more competencies at the European level and in European institutions. The other scenario is less Europe, which, to my view, would lead to no Europe, because the situation is so fragile that if we decide to go steps backward, then there is a fear that this thing will be disrupted. And there is a third scenario that maybe at the European level, instead of these 20 member states which are equal, there is a cooperation of some of them, of some committed members, which will be the core of the European Union. And this is what I'm going to talk about, what kind of Europe we need. Not only we as Europeans, we are in the member states, but the others, the neighbors, what it is important not only for Europe, but for the international situation and the global geopolitics as a whole. The immigration challenge is likely to continue for many years, even for decades. It is not only the Syria war. There are many people who believe that if Syria war finishes, then we are okay, the refugee flow will stop. This is not the case. We know very well that the demographics terrify us. There is a huge problem, a demographic increase in Africa. And there is not a decrease, and a decrease as well in growth. So when you have millions of young people and no jobs and no employment, then there will be new flows towards Europe. And we very well know that the European Union is the wealthy neighborhood of the neighbor of all these countries around. So the flows of people into the European Union will go through fluctuations, but will probably continue at a high level for a foreseeable future. As a consequence, Europe will undergo profound challenges. So much is certain, but whether this process proceeds in a managed fashion, we know what to do and we have a roadmap, or if it takes place in a chaotically situation, it will make very clear what will be our future. We have to prepare a roadmap. We have to understand that the future of our continent links with the refugee issue. My personal view, and this is what I fight for in my country and at the European level, because I participate in many forums, is that because of the new global situation and because Europe consists of very small countries, you are coming from all the world. You know that even the biggest European country, which is Germany, is not a big country comparing the situation in the global world. So I believe that we cannot respond to this challenge individually. There is not even one European country that it can do it itself. It can manage it. So we have to be together. So there is a need for more Europe. Is it possible with the situation we have, with the political trends in many member states, where in Great Britain we have the Brexit to win, in France, Le Pen is a very strong movement, more than 30%, and they are against Europe. In Austria, we saw about 45% extreme right, which the rhetoric was against Europe, the same in Italy. So we can see everywhere that there are so many doubts. Can we solve this Gordian knot problem? Do you know the Gordian knot problem? Because it was Alexander the Great who really cut the Gordian knot. We must seek an answer to the problems in a different way than we did until now. What must be done to overcome this intra-European conflict, which has an impact to the whole world, in order to achieve balance that produces common ground and allows for political and social consensus? We have to make some very concrete things. First of all, we have to understand that there is a crisis in solidarity, and we have to overcome this, to solve this problem. What means crisis of solidarity? It means that when in Greece 1 million people are coming in a few months, and in Italy hundreds of thousands of people from Africa come in a few months, the other member states cannot just say that this is your own problem, because you are the gate, so it's your own problem, you have to solve it. We have to understand that must be a dissemination in all member states, and this is what Germany did. But on the other side, is it right that Germany has 1 million people, refugees, and France has 30,000? So these are big questions, and it is obvious that there is a crisis of solidarity, because we cannot choose. We cannot just say, okay, the refugees are there, and you have to deal with them. No, refugees are human beings. They are not boats. They are not just a piece of fortune. They are human beings, and they will find a way to move. And if we do not organize safe routes for the refugees, then we know from history that war, and we have to think of that, is not very far away. So, first of all, we have to agree on common rules on dissemination of refugees. And I'm not talking generally of what we have to do about the war or the development in Africa. This is the outside, out of our borders politics. I'm talking about from the moment that the refugees are entering the European Union. So the first thing is how to organize safe channels, safe roads, not leaving people traveling through the sea, the Aegean Sea, with very small boats. In one small boat, there are more than 100 people, 50 children, which is as if they commit suicide. Safe channels means that we do not close the borders, because in that case, families and children and absolutely people who have no other solution. They are absolutely hopeless. They travel through mountains, through rivers, and we have so many job losses. So, safe channels. Second, resettlement. It is very important to agree on the standards, and these standards must be the same in all member states. And if we have the same standards and we agree to disseminate the refugees, then it will be much, much easier. It is different to Europe as a whole to accept 4 million refugees, if I see the biggest number that we can imagine now, because we have to disseminate 4 million in 500 million people. This is the population of Europe. But if you leave it to Greece or to Italy or to Germany, then things become extremely difficult. Then we have to agree that we have to give humanitarian visas. When we don't give visas, we don't give legal papers to people, then we push them to the worst conditions we can imagine. And of course, the third very important issue is the integration procedures. And the integration procedures, which is housing, hospital, schools, taking care of the most weakest people, these cannot be handled in the same way from rich countries or from countries with big problems, with big economic problems. So Germany is the most powerful country today in Europe. Austria is a very wealthy country. France is a wealthy country. There are countries in Central Europe or in Eastern Europe or in the South who are not so strong, economically strong. So we all have to share the integration problem in a way that we understand that the budget must be there, because now the budget is very, very low. Is it important for each country? So it is important for Greece? Is it just important for Italy or for Europe as a whole? Or the world as a whole? If we have policies in place and we include in our societies the refugees, then it will be helpful for our societies as well, because we have huge demographic problems in Europe, but it will be very good for them, because otherwise, I repeat, that we pushed them, and then they have to react. They're human beings. And it is extremely dangerous for Europe if we have people who are aggressive inside Europe, people who are aggressive outside Europe, and then they link. Where we stand and where we go. Europe's response on the issue, which was essentially shaped by a sense of urgency. This is what we did last year. This agreement with Turkey and what we decided concerning the quotas of dissemination and what we decided for the first budget we presented, it was a short-term fix that allowed the European Union to regain control of its external borders and end hastily unrelated moves by some member states. This was what we did because we were under big stress, great stress. Deep-seated political divisions in the Union on the migration issue remain, of course, and these are divisions between the member states, but within political parties as well in each country. All member states are not ready to accept, as I said, a fair share of the migration burden, undermining the principle of unity and risking fragmentation and free riding. Due to this unwillingness of some states to fulfill their obligation for resettlement, Greece now is transformed into a de facto hotspot with insufficient facilities for the number of asylum seekers already there. Can you just imagine very small islands as Lesbos or Limnos, if you see them in the map, they are islands in the borders with Turkey, and there are stuck thousands of refugees, and according to the European agreement, they cannot move. So it is impossible to be included in the society. The relocation process is beset when has its own problems. And this is the question that if the deal between European Union and Turkey will be implemented. It is a very important agreement. It has huge difficulties from all sides because there are political problems and the public opinion here and there is very obsessed. But it is very important that we keep this agreement. And of course, in this context, there are some very particular issues. I don't want to add this in my discussion because you have to know about them, and you don't, of course. It is the Dublin Convention, it is the Schengen Treaty, it is the role of Frontex. So there are institutional and treaty agreements at the European levels, at the European level, that they have to be rethought. Of course, it is important to see the positive conditionality for countries of origin. And this means that we have to work with these countries in order to assist the voluntary return, the readmission policy, legal migration procedures, and respect for human rights in the event of forced return. This is a big other problem is, as I said, the budget. Who will pay for all this? What kind of budget are going to use in order to deal with the refugee issue? There are some ideas. For the time being, we have used money from the existing European budget, which is not a big one. Just to give you an idea, the European budget is 1% of the GDP of all member states, so it's a small one. But there are some ideas. What I believe, there must be a European tax only for having money to deal with the refugee issue, and a new tax on inbound EU travel or visa applications, which would shift some of the burden onto non-EU citizens, because it's not a European issue, it is an international one. My last point on this very brief presentation of the situation, it is that raising barriers will not solve problems, because the populistic and the extra-right parties in Europe have found the solution. Just build fences in the boundaries, just push them outside Europe, and the problem is solved. No, it is not. And the human history can teach us that we can never stop the human flows. Because these are hopeless people, they live destroyed areas, they have no hope there, they have lost their children, their parents, everybody, and this kind of hopeless people will always find a way to go somewhere else. What we should do from conflict to an equilibrium, the construction of a common ground of social and political consensus on migration. We are operating within an interpolar international system. That is a world which is multipolar and interlinked. The refugee crisis has made this point absolutely clear. The hard way, I would say. It made all of us realize that our world, our continent, is so unavoidable, interconnected with the whole world. It is not just a happy Europe and all the others around us and we don't have anything to do. And we understand very well that what happens in the Middle East or what happens in Africa has now an immediate impact in the European Union. So, in a few words, so there is a problem, I cannot go to the next. Here.
where we stand and where to go.
We're going to go here. Okay. Just I put here this.
Yeah,
Okay.
in theory.
Okay, yes. So, just in a few words, there are the member states, there are the European institutions. What we have immediately to do? First, the member states, so each country, from Germany to Malta, I mean from the biggest to the smallest one, implement existing rules. We have decided that each country has to accept some refugees according to its population, fully participate to solidarity mechanisms. So we have to agree how we have a European asylum, how we give the visa, a list of things that we have to agree and to implement. Convince via dialogue or via the use of legal and financial means reluctant partners. So if somebody at the European level does not accept the common rules, then there must be a policy of a stick and a carrot. I mean, nobody can just say, I don't accept this kind of proposals. What member states and EU institutionals should do together? Operational improvement of border management. There is a huge problem in the way that they take the asylum visa. It is very late. Each country had to send some experts. They haven't sent the experts. They haven't sent the equipment. So here we have to be as quick as possible. And we have to be very, very strict with the respect of human rights. This is something that Europe is proud of, and we cannot go an inch back of this situation. We have to respect human rights wherever the refugees are, if they are in the borders, if they are in hotspot, or if they are in our cities and in our villages. And of course, the European Commission has to perform as a treaty keeper, and this is the mission, and it means that it has to monitor each member state if it is okay with the commonly decided EU rules. And I would like just to say a word for media. Maybe we could discuss hours about the role of media. Here, I've just some titles portray the reality of political actions, because we have always such an exaggeration, many times against the refugees. Enhance accuracy and avoid misleading shortcomings, particularly for the refugees. Look beyond national borders and internal politics. We cannot just focus in our country and forget what is going in the world or what is going on in our neighborhood. And of course, there is a need of treatment of journalists in the way they present these issues, and I believe that the journalists' associations have to play a role, because with this very fragile political situation in our countries, it is very easy. If something happens by refugees, you have seen what happened with the Afghan guy here in Germany, and in one day there was a huge reaction, but this is one among 1 million people. If the journalists do not treat it with respect, and if they exaggerate or they present it or something which has to do particularly with the refugees, then we understand that the common opinion will very easily follow the populists and far-right extreme parties. Here, my last point is about the EU institutions. There are so many institutions in the European Union. There are centers, there are cooperation with universities. We have to work for the global and EU trends for the next years. Not only the professors or migration experts or the political scientists, the economists or the demographers or the foreign policy experts, not only them. I think we have to include other people than the usual players, like the urbanists, the designers, philosophers, architects, have to work on preparing the roadmap for a Europe of our future. Dear ladies and gentlemen, a few years ago, when we had the economic crisis in 2008, in record time, the European Union established new institutions. They spent billions of euros in order to overcome the euro crisis. The treaty was not an obstacle at that time. Political leaders have to save their economies, and they did it, although they asked for external assistance by the IMF. This is really the time to overcome our sensitive political taboos and start to implement a common European defense and security policy. I have no illusions. I'm working many, many years on European issues, and I'm aware of the difficulties of this implementation. However, if we fail to do this, individual member states, regardless of the size, being big or small, will end up as weak, unfortified entities, being it France or Poland, being it Malta or Luxembourg. To accomplish this, we need a critical mass of politicians, of journalists, of academics, across the spectrum to convince European citizens that strong nations presuppose strong Europe which respects the human rights. Thank you.
Thank you very much. No, we don't. We are not. No, we are going to keep you here, because after this very interesting presentation, I am sure that there will be several questions, but we will not give the floor to everyone who wants to take the floor or make comments or ask questions. We will take only two questions, and we also watch here gender equality, giving the priority to ladies, positive discrimination in favor of ladies. I give, yeah, okay, you have the floor. Could you, is there a microphone?
Hello, my name is Alexandra Pocescu. I'm from Romanian Embassy in Berlin. The question is, does European Union, due to its fragility right now and the sensitive times we are all living in, has the means to impose these migrant quotas to all the countries in EU? Because we know there are countries who publicly denied it and they will not accept it. So how can European Union enforce this to everybody equally?
Okay, yes.
So the second question, I can ask. Okay. My name is Dragan Domazet. I come from Belgrade. I'm rector of Belgrade Metropolitan University and former Serbian minister. If this scenario and your plan is realized, I'm afraid that the future Europe will not be the Europe that we know. I'm afraid that we are not talking about 4 million refugees. Probably we are talking about 40 or more million of refugees, because strategically a flow of people from Africa will go to the north. If we don't solve the problem in their own country, if we don't solve the problem of natality explosion, we have to solve the problems in the source, in the roots. Building highways to Europe, we change the cultural landscape, and we promote far-rightist parties to get the power, because people don't like such kind of diversity. Because if you're immigrants, you come to any country, you have to adopt and to be integrated, to adopt the local culture, local customs, and so on. I'm afraid with such a huge influx of refugees is not possible. And it will create a lot of problems in Europe. And I'm afraid we'll have destruction of Europe. So how you comment this?
They are both very, very interesting and not easy questions. The first one, how to impose. I will tell you what I believe that, of course, European Union can impose it, and how. Since there is a decision, this decision must be implemented, and if a member state does not implement it, there will be sanctions. What kind of sanctions? First of all, no European money. This is something very simple, and the European Union can decide it. Second, not participation in some kind of decisions. But for the time being, there was no discussion on sanctions. There was only philological discussions about how important it is to show solidarity. So this is politics. It is not just a company of people. This is two things that I believe that the European Council can decide and impose. Now, the second question. You are absolutely right, because that's why I explained that I don't speak, I haven't referred to what we have done, what we have to do outside our borders. Because if we say, okay, Europe is here, we will accept refugees, you can come throughout the world, immigrants as well, and Europe is here, it will be a catastrophe for all of us. It will be a catastrophe for the member states, for the societies, and for the economies. I tried to say what we have to do for the situation now and for these people who are forced to be in another country, particularly because of this very, very catastrophic war. Now, I'm coming to your question. Generally, that's why I said we have to work for future with many kind of specialists. First of all, Europe has to is obliged to invest in Africa. There is a country, there's Tanzania. Is anybody here from Tanzania? Tanzania, if you see it in the map, it is a big country. It is more or less like France. In 2030, it will have a population like Russia. And according to the estimations, the growth will be the same. So what will these millions of people do? We see it, we know that it is coming. So Europe has to invest in Africa. And not only Europe, China has started to do it for different reasons. But it is number one priority to see what we do for Africa in order to keep people in its country and to give to young people the possibility to work and to make their lives in their own countries. Secondly, as far as the war is concerned, of course Europe has to play a different role. Now it is a discussion between the United States and Russia. But the Americans are far away. And no refugee wants to go to Russia. So these are the two who are quarreling about what is going to do in Syria. And at the same time, Europe is staying outside. So it is very important that's why I said, but I say, maybe this was a mistake that I tried to say many things. I said that we need a common foreign and security policy. We cannot anymore stay or believe that the Americans will take care of our borders, particularly after Trump, because we all know what Trump said. Okay, guys, you do what you want, I don't send my money to Europe. So I don't know if he will implement it, but this is what Trump said. So European Union has to unify its arms. It has so many armies. Its country has its own army. And we have to decide to defend our borders and at the same time to intervene in this conflict and not let the two others to quarrel over us. Thank you. Oh no, there is one more point. What you said is very important. It is about the will of people to accept the foreigners. No, they don't. And we understand it very well through the centuries. So what it is important is to make people understand, or to make very clear, that if somebody enters our society, is obliged to live according to our rules and to our laws, with no exception. Otherwise, it will be an internal conflict, and we don't know where it goes to lead. Thank you very much.